Hey everybody, how's it going? A little bit of an early afternoon at work, so I came home. I got an hour or two to putter in the shop. Um, this is going to be an important video. We can all learn from my mistakes and learn together about certain saws. Um, I'm going to go over a few things with you guys about this saw, but saws in general. Okay, I think this is an important video to make. For several reasons. Number one, not every saw goes together and you just pull the cord and it runs and tunes, okay? Light ported saws that are newer, generally, yeah, I put them together and they run. No problems, no air leaks, okay? 2 out of four, you'll have to mess with the carb a little bit, maybe do a metering lever adjustment, and then it'll be good. But then you get that 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5. That's this saw. I put this thing together. It started right away, friends. Okay. I can't remember, 4 or 5 pulls. It fired. Okay. If a saw doesn't start in 4, 5, 6 pulls from dry when it's brand new, I usually go, I probably got an air leak. Those of you that build saws, do you find that too? If you got to pull a saw over 10, 12 times to get it to fire from new, is it your experience too that that's usually the saw that's going to give you troubles? Post in the comments. This saw started in 4 pulls from cold, okay? So right there I was like, okay, we got something here. It fired up. I had to mess with the carb, being that it's the wrong carb on here. It's the right carb, but it's wrong, if you guys know what I'm saying. I got it to settle down. But right away, I had an air leak. I knew I did. I could feel it. I didn't have an air leak when I put the saw together, though. What happened is, remember I mentioned that little carrier that holds the crank seal behind the flywheel? That little carrier was leaking around the flange, okay? I described that when I was putting it together. Well, this one was leaking bad. Even with a new seal on it, it still leaked. So what did I do? I put MotoSeal around that flange, a good coating, and I smushed it on there, torqued it down, and I let it dry. Vac and pressure tested, no more air leaks. 2 to 3 minutes of vac test at 15 psi. I dropped like 2 widths of the needle. That's more than acceptable. Okay, so we did that. I pressure tested it. It held pressure for 5 minutes, so we don't seem to have any air leaks. Okay. Again though, I put this saw back together. I'm going to put a little clip here. I want you guys to listen to how this saw runs and then I'll talk about it. Okay, so here's a clip from the other day when I first fired the saw up, and you can hear it. It's not idling good. It's hard to keep idling. It's hard to tune. It's just all over the place. Okay, I want you to listen to this saw run and then we'll jump back in. Okay, so what do we hear? The more saws you build, the more you're going to be able to spot problems. First thing is, it revs up and then it drops down to a certain RPM, say 1200 RPM or whatever, 2000 RPM, and then it's slow coming down. That tells me this saw might have an air leak. You're asking, how can it have an air leak if you vacuum pressure tested it? I'll tell you. Number two, When it does settle down to idle, it loads up right away. Why is it loading up? Because I'm tuning the low jet around an air leak. This carb is massive, and it's the timing of the intake, the transfers, everything I did to this is to make this thing move fuel. This thing's moving so much fuel that I can tune around an air leak. Okay? Touch the throttle, it's got a little bog. Now, hopefully you heard that in that video. I'll put a section in there with a little bog. It bogs on the first time I poke the throttle, and then after that it runs clean. Why? Because it's loaded up with fuel because I'm tuning around an air leak. This is what I'm thinking. Okay? Now you guys are asking, how do you have an air leak but it passed vacuum pressure test? Well, what I did is I put a piece of rubber in between the intake block and the cylinder. Okay? I obviously have a leak, either on this side of the intake block or between the intake block and the carb. That is one of the reasons why Husqvarna went away from this setup. This is a bad system. It's awful. It might seem good to newcomers. I read in the comments, why would anybody go away from that? Because it's a poor design. For several reasons. Number one, these intakes are the plastic off gases as it gets old and heated and it gets brittle. These warp, they crack, they leak. Okay? This is a brand new OEM block and it's leaking. For sure it is. Number two, vibration. Vibration's not super good for carburetors. Number three, the impulse hole is impulse through here. Those are prone to leaking. You could have an intake that's not leaking, but have an impulse hole that is leaking, and it will make your carb act up. Very hard to diagnose, right? Because you're not sure. Do I have a bad carb kit? Do I have an air leak? Okay. And number three, the main reason why they went away from that on these saws, the 394s, there's so many good old school saws, 288s, 281s, all had this block. The reason why they went away from it, heat. These get hot and it heats your carburetor up. It can make these hard to restart, hard to tune. So I knew that going into this. I build these often. I've built many of them in this shop. Most of them are 30 years old and they all have problems. Okay, even on this side, on this oil pump, these leak. I've had many an oil pump leak. I keep a lot of scrap saws just to swap parts because you never know what you're going to need on one of these. So, I want to show you guys. Okay, this saw does not run good. It starts 2 poles. I started it this morning in 2 poles and it sat there, but it will not idle. So, and where is our low screw at? I'm going to find my tuning screwdriver, wherever it might be. Here we go. What's our low at? I was playing with this thing this morning, okay? 1/2, 1, and 1/4, okay? That should be right about where it is. But for whatever reason, it doesn't want to tune, okay? So my guess is I have an intake leak. Really hard to spray starting fluid or brake clean or anything in there, carb cleaner, because if you spray it in there, it sucks through the bottom of the air filter and you end up with a muffler full of carb cleaner and it races or it dies, right? So what can you do? I'm going to put MotoSeal around these OEM gaskets and this OEM intake block and call it a day. I'm going to try that first. Another thing I want to do on this saw, I want to change the flywheel. This flywheel's been rubbed by the old cylinder, and I can feel a vibration, and I have a feeling it's because this flywheel's nicked. Here, I'll show you guys. There. I don't know if you guys can see it. These fins have all been filed down, so I don't know if that's what it is, but this saw's a little vibey. I don't think it's from the piston or anything. I have a feeling it's from the flywheel. So we'll deal with that at a later date. I want to get this thing idling first, okay? One more thing to tell you guys. This is why I tell you guys not to turn your saws up too hot. It's not that you can't do it, or I don't believe you can do it. The more horsepower you make with a saw, the hotter they run, the harder they are to tune, the harder they are to start. It's like a dragster. friends, okay? These single spring clutch, okay? This clutch, these like to idle at a really low speed. Well, when you port the living snot out of one of these, which I did to this, it's going to idle faster, okay? It's going to probably idle faster than this clutch is going to be comfortable with. This clutch is going to engage, and then we're going to have clutch issues. So I might have to put a 272 clutch on this. That's a possibility. So with every ounce of power you suck out of one of these, you end up with more issues. That's why don't go too far in your timing to start with, okay? Okay, friends, I'm just gonna jump in and out of here. I'm not sure where my camera's at. There you go. I'm gonna jump in and out, but I wanted to discuss a few things. I don't think it's fair for me to just put saws together, work on them over the next week, drop another video of it running. I don't think that's fair to you guys. I have problems with saws I build. I do. Anybody that doesn't, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I mean, that's the deal. When you're building old saws, you're going to have problems. This thing's 30 some odd years old. Easily 30, 35 years old. Okay? It's going to have issues. And you got to work through those issues. And the more horsepower you make, the worse the air leaks get. I mean, you just... So guys, if you have a problem and you get frustrated, try not to get frustrated. If a saw don't run good and you've been working on it all day, stick it under the bench. Go in, hang out with your wife, watch a little TV or whatever you do, drink a coffee. Deal with it another day or another 2 days. Do a little reading or call one of your buddies. Often it'll come to you what the problem is. Don't try and force your will on a new build because it'll frustrate you and you'll end up making mistakes. At least that's the way it works for me. I haven't worked on the saw. I took a couple days and now I'm back into it. Let's see what we can do. It'll either tune or it won't. If this thing is still loading up at idle, I'm going to have to lower the metering lever. Okay, that controls how much fuel the carburetor lets in. It might be a touch high right now, and that might be my issue, but I think I'm tuning around an intake leak because my L screw isn't overly out. I'd like it closer to a 1 turn or 7/8, so it's about a quarter turn too far out. And this thing just doesn't want to idle. It doesn't want to come down to idle, which tells me I probably have an air leak. Once it comes down to idle, if my metering lever is too high, it's probably not going to idle. It's going to be super smoky and rich. That's when you know, bump that metering lever just a hair. You know, 5 thousandths even, and put it back together, and usually the saw will run. Some ported saws want more metering lever. Again, that comes with experience, and these are the things you got to do the hotter you turn the saw up. And it can be very frustrating if you don't know the ins and outs of a carb and you port a saw warm. It'll be really hard to get it running properly and you'll get frustrated. And that's not what I want for you guys. I want you guys to have an outlet that you can go into your shop or your shed or your basement, wherever you work, and just enjoy puttering. It's good for the soul. It really is. So anyhow, I'm going to rip this thing down quick and I'll jump in and out and show you guys what I find as I find it. Okay, friends, I had the saw running there. You can see it starts, it idles, it settles down quickly. I can flip it all around. It's good. What did I do to achieve that? Well, on a hunch, I took the oil pump off. I put a little assembly silicone around where that O-ring is and put that in. Torqued it back down. I actually swapped the flywheel, and that didn't do anything. So I put the flywheel that was on here back on. I then, on a hunch, took a coil off of a junk saw that I have. I have the same coil. Put that coil on. The sparks seemed to be more blue. Well, after I did that, I gave it a little more low jet, and it seemed to fire. But it seemed kind of lean still. This is a drag race motor now, basically. It's a high lift cam. It's a big block. It's got a big carb. It needs a bigger fuel pump. So what I did is I went into the bottom of the carb, and I increased the height of the metering lever. That metering lever, if you raise it higher, it allows more fuel into the whole carb. If you raise it lower, it leans the carb out. Factory setting is not going to work on a saw like this. You can take all factory settings and throw them in the garbage, basically. I raised it up quite a bit just to see. Well, with that and way more low jet, this thing starts and idles now. So basically, we needed a bigger fuel pump. This thing was starving for fuel, and that's why it was so hard to start and idle. I also think this coil I put on really helped. Is this saw going to want to idle faster? Yep, for sure it is. It's going to want to idle faster. Once we get this clutch good and warm, we may find out that this saw doesn't want. Once we start this thing and run it and get the clutch hot, this saw may not want to idle. I'm going to have to maybe modify the clutch on it. It idles now and it restarts good, so, I'm happy. So that goes to show you, friends, sometimes saws are not going to work out. I'm going to show you guys because I got nothing to hide here. I'm just having fun. I'm building saws for my buddy, and, Buckin and I are just having fun together. It makes good content for you guys, and I'm having fun. I've never put a 390 carb on a 266. I've never put a Y-Scope piston in a chainsaw. I've never cut the transfers out like that. Remember, if you're going to try and do a build like this, be aware you're going to have problems. The more horsepower you get out of a chainsaw, the more chances you're going to have issues. If you have a small air leak, when you put this kind of power through a saw, you're going to have a big air leak. You might have to swap coils. You may have to advance the timing. You may need a bigger carburetor. Be prepared for all that stuff. I just spent 2 hours swapping parts and tweaking this thing. All the little things I did, now it starts, idles, and tunes. But don't be afraid on some of these saws, friends. You're going to have to turn those jets out, especially the low jet. You might have to turn it out 3 turns to get the saw to run. Factory settings are null and void when you do stuff like this to a saw. So anyhow, friends, I got to change the handle. This linkage is giving me problems, and I got to change this handle because the end of the linkage actually broke off. So I have a spare one, but that means I'm going to have to take the saw down and pull the handle and put a new linkage in and then put it all back together. So I want to get this thing finished. I got a few pieces to Loctite. I'm going to break it in with this muffler, and then we'll go from there. Anyhow, friends, as always, thanks for watching. I love showing you guys the stuff that I do. And like I said, if you get frustrated, put the saw down and sleep on it a day or two. Often the answer will come to you. Or do a little reading on the internet or phone a buddy. Send me an email if you're having problems with your saw. Maybe I know something. Maybe I don't. A lot of times you guys send me emails and I'm like, But you know what I'll do often, friends? If I don't know the answer, I'll ask some of my friends. We'll figure it out together. That's what this is all about. Thanks for watching. Take her easy. Later, guys.